So I've made a video analyzing the Diurnal ending, and during my research of the Nocturnal ending, this video, I realized I was completely wrong. Now, as you can tell, we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff. So I broke the video down into 5 parts that you should see on the screen right now. So without further ado, let's get started. We're going to start with the Kains. Although I haven't played Pathologic 1, during my research of the Kains, I inevitably came across Pathologic 1 content. Because as you know, we play as Artemy in Pathologic 2, and he doesn't really interact that much with the Kains. In contrast to Pathologic 1, you can play as all 3 characters, Clara, Artemy, and Dankovsky. And Dankovsky interacts a lot with the Kains, and there's a lot of insight you can get from Pathologic 1. So I am going to reference some of Pathologic 1's content, but most of the stuff I'm about to say is from Artemy's POV, right? So it's quite clear from the get-go what the Kains are capable of, but it's not really clear in Pathologic 2 why they came to town. What's their purpose for being in this town in the middle of nowhere? Because these guys are supposed to be legendary architects. For some reason, they chose this dingy town in the middle of nowhere for their project. Now in Pathologic 1, we are actually given some insight as to what their plan is in this town. The Kains actually achieved their own weird immortality through Simon Kain, while George and Victor managed to prolong their lives through the manipulation of time. And they can manipulate time through their architecture. It's super complicated and takes long to explain, so let's just leave it at that. And what they're basically doing in this town is that they want to build a permanent host for Simon Kain, because Simon Kain retains his immortality by having his soul take over his descendant's physical body. At least this is what we are told in Pathologic 1, and I don't know if it's still canon because the developers and the writers did tweak a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but let's just assume it is. But even so, it does not answer our initial question: why this town? Why this dingy ass town in the middle of nowhere? And I actually have a perfect explanation for this. I don't think they wanted to store Simon's soul inside of the polyhedron like many people say. Instead, they wanted to use the polyhedron to manifest a god, and this god is where they wanted to store Simon's soul. A permanent host, and his immortality would no longer be a technical one, but rather an actual form of immortality. But then again, the question still remains. They could have done this anywhere else. Like, why did they choose this town? Well, it's simply because compared to other traditional gods, the god worshipped in this town, the kin to be more specific, has a much more tangible form of appearance. To further explain, if you think about other traditional gods, the image of their actual appearance is up to interpretation. There is no ubiquitous interpretation of their appearance. But with the god that they worship in this town, is much more replicable. And I don't know if that's a word, but it's actually possible to replicate in contrast to other traditional gods, because they worship a bull. Bos Turok is the god they worship. It's the image of a bull that does not require much imagination, and the Kains actually did manage to replicate it. And I have a lot of evidence to back this up. The first most obvious evidence is the conversation Artemy has with Yulia. And Yulia is the road architect for the town, hired by the Kains, and they specifically instructed her to make the roads in the shape of a nervous system. And this is where the second evidence comes in. After day 9 and the visit in the abattoir, it's revealed that the nervous system is supposed to be the nervous system of a bull. Because after day 9, I did not know this until I saw a post on Reddit. If you zoom out enough on your map, the town transforms into an image of the bull, and it's fairly obvious that the nervous system is supposed to represent the nervous system of a bull without the polyhedron, which also hints at something else. This is not the real Bos Turok. It's a fake version of him, a manifested version of him, if you will, because Bos Turok is a literal god that existed way before the polyhedron was created. In short, the real Bos Turok does not need the tower to exist. So the one we are dealing with in the game is just another version of him manifested by the Kains / the polyhedron. I believe this was their plan from the beginning, but the only thing that they lacked was the method of manifesting this god into existence until they heard about the Stamatin brothers. I have a lot to say about specifically Peter, but for now, let me tell you about the god himself, Bos Turok. At the beginning of the Nocturnal ending, we speak to Sticky and he mentions this book, Paus Merges, which I assume is the pronunciation, but excuse me if it's not. It's a book that talks about the tale of Posturok. Interestingly enough though, Sticky also mentions that the street in the Nocturnal ending look identical to the ones described in the book. But for now, I'm going to read a passage from the book. There was a time when there were neither day nor night, neither top nor bottom, neither sea nor land. There was but one thing in the world, and it was the great bull, the father of flesh, the carver of lines, the bearer of horns, Posturok. Up from the abyss came Suok, and she filled the world with herself. She devoured all the stars and all the light. Neither fire nor water could harm Suok, neither old age nor the abyss itself. It was darkness then. Posturok, the great bull, had frozen in the darkness. His cry was strong enough to pierce it, but it couldn't pierce Suok. She spread herself further and there was darkness once again. And so Posturok, in his despair, opened his mouth horizon to horizon and started devouring Suok. Oh, how she struggled, trying to flee back to the abyss. And yet, she came to be devoured by Posturok bit by bit. To this day, she is inside of him, trying in vain to consume him from within his tight embrace. Posturok had belched fear from within his depth to exgorge his pain. Posturok had forced iron from his horns to set the law and shut Suok to eternal imprisonment within his maw. Posturok had conjured up the wheel with his thought, so that all be destined to return to the beginning. This is a really cool story, not just in the context of the game, but just in general. This is the god the kin worship, the creator of all things, including destiny, an extremely powerful cosmic being. And this is the very same being that the Kains intended to manifest, and the one thing they did not expect, either through oversight or overconfidence, is the manifestation of the darkness within Posturok. Maybe they thought Simon would be able to quote-unquote win against Suok, or maybe they thought she wouldn't be manifested because they didn't include her in their design or whatever. Either way, I think they unexpectedly found out about Suok when they actually attempted to store his soul inside of the manifested version of Posturok. And from now, just to avoid confusion, by the way, when I say Posturok, I'm actually referring to the manifested version of him. When I want to refer to the real one, I'm just going to say the real Posturok, just to avoid confusion and make life easier for me. I don't think they ever intended for Simon to actually die. I don't think they knew Suok would be in there, or they didn't expect her to be this much of a problem. And I don't think Simon himself actually expected to die. The game tells us that Simon actually intended to die with Isidore, but again, I don't think it's the case. I think he actually expected to come back through his odd version of immortality. But the game purposely leaves out a lot of stuff about the Kains, especially Simon. So let's just leave it at that. He died. A lot of people theorize that he didn't, but I think Simon Kain is actually dead, because why else would the powers that be mourning him? The powers that be would know if he's not dead. Their mourning of him suggests to me that he's actually dead, and his death was caused by the oversight or the overconfidence the Kains had when it came to Suok. Another thing I want to mention about Posturok is that the polyhedron has put him in a weakened state. And you know how throughout the game you can sometimes see the land actually bleeding? I previously assumed and was so sure that this was Mother Bodo, but I think it's actually supposed to be Posturok, not Mother Bodo. The main point of this is the manifestation of Suok and how she affects the town in the Nocturnal ending. So the point I'm going to be making about Suok is actually not too long, because it's pretty straightforward. I think in the weakened state that Posturok was in actually allowed Suok to release parts of her darkness and successfully corrupt Mother Bodo. And I think Aspeti's interpretation that the plague is actually Mother Bodo's self-defense mechanism is a lie. I think Mother Bodo, just like Saint Clara, is trying to help, but her helping touch, her healing touch, just like Clara, has now been corrupted by Suok, and when she tries to help, she ends up harming. And unfortunately, I don't have evidence for this claim, but I thought this correlation of her and Saint Clara actually worked really well, and that's just something of a little personal touch. Let's go back to Aspity and why I cannot trust her, because when you talk to her in the Nocturnal ending, she weirdly feels the need to mention Suok and her harvest. Like, why do you feel the need to mention this? And secondly, she just straight up lies. She says in the Nocturnal ending that the kin had accepted their fate and they were patiently awaiting their death. But that's such a lie, because I think it was on day 12, I'm not sure, I think it is day 12, but a bunch of the kin come to Artemy and beg him not to destroy the polyhedron because they're too scared to die. They don't want to die. In the actual game though, you can only see like a crowd of them, around 7 or 8 of them maybe, but I think it was supposed to represent much more. Like, I think it was supposed to be a more significant portion of the kin, but the game just does not do a good job at showing the scale of people. For example, hundreds of people are supposed to be dying every day, right? At one point, it's thousands. But if you're wandering around town, it's certainly does not look like thousands are dying every day. Sure, it feels like it, but it does not look like it. Which is why I just assume this is just a technical problem and it was supposed to be a much more significant portion of the kin that came to beg Artemy that they did not want to die, and I'm going to assume it is. And assuming this is why I say Aspity is straight up lying, because they were not ready to die. Which leads me to this idea, very interesting idea that I don't have evidence to back up with. I think she's actually a servant of Suok, pretending to be a servant of Mother Bodon. But yeah, either way, through Aspity, the existence of Suok is 100% confirmed. And not just that, but in Pathologic 3, the demo, there is a visual representation of Suok through Dankovsky. And I say this because this means there is no doubt of her existence. And explaining how she actually exists is what led to my very theory that I'm making about the Nocturnal ending. Not theory, but analysis. The Kains are the ones ultimately responsible for the plague, and this might be common knowledge. Maybe they explained this in Pathologic 1, but for me, this was pretty mind-blowing. Before I get to the actual conclusion of this analysis, I need to mention a few more things, and these are more contextual facts, you know? It's not necessarily canon to the point I'm trying to make, so you can skip this part, but you're going to be missing out, because it's really interesting stuff. Starting with Peter, and I have a lot to say about this guy. First of all, this dude is trash. My interpretation of Peter is just a disgusting monster. He is clearly a child predator. And let me explain, okay? I'm not gonna make claims like this without evidence, but the first and most obvious one is that he is the designer of the polyhedron. We know that Andre is the one who actually brings his designs to life, but either way, he is the designer, and I can't even imagine the exact process of this, but maybe he kind of imbues his essence into everything he builds, and that's why he can build all these magical architectures, or I don't know. But the fact remains that he's the one who designed the polyhedron. So why is it that he designed it in a way where it only attracts children? Why is it that the polyhedron was designed in a way to attract children? Now, second hint is that all the children in the polyhedron are extremely distrusting of adults. And I think this is because in a weird way, the children are connected to the polyhedron more so than the creators themselves, which is why they can make, you know, their thoughts come true to the polyhedron and whatever. You know, I don't want to get into too much detail of their relationship with polyhedron, but I think they're connected in a way to know Peter is trash. Or maybe it's more simple than that, you know, one of them got assaulted by Peter and they told the children about it. But this is not even the biggest piece of evidence, guys. Let's talk about Grace. So with Grace, I don't know if you know this, you can actually choose to send her back to town from the cemetery, because as you know, her parents passed away and she inherits the cemetery, which automatically makes her the caretaker. But some fancy people from town, you know, determines that this is not healthy for her, and fair enough, you know, she's a kid, you know, taking care of a cemetery, you know, fair enough. So Artemy can actually choose to either leave her there or send her back to town. And if you choose to send her back to town, guess who the first person is to jump at the chance of being her caretaker? Guess who it is? Yeah, it's Peter. It's damn Peter. You could just play it off as, nah, he's just being a nice guy, you know? He's just taking care of this child. Sure. But here's where it gets actually suspicious. In the Diurnal ending, Grace actually gets adopted by the Saburov family. And Katerina Saburov absolutely forbids Grace from ever visiting Peter. And you could say she's being overly protective of Grace, but then why just Peter? If she was being overprotective, overbearing, she would surely restrict her general access to people in town, but no. It's just Peter, nobody else, specifically Peter. So ask yourself, why just Peter? And not just that, but as you speak to Grace during the Diurnal ending, she does not seem upset at all. She just seems confused, and she says something along the lines of she's confused as to why she's forbidden to see Peter because they grew so close together. Like, do you need any more hints as to what kind of monster this dude is? And this might be reading too much into it, but the fact that she's not upset at Katerina for forbidding her tells me that Katerina actually spoke in a fair way. She communicated in a way she would not feel like it's unfair. She was just confused. She wasn't upset, which suggests to me that Katerina is maybe a good mother, a good person, more like. And the fact that this good person is absolutely forbidding her to specifically not see Peter, and with all the context that we have with the polyhedron, them getting close together, you know, her being confused, is just iffy, man. For me, it all points to this guy that this dude is an absolute PDF file. All right. So I felt like I had to get this point across because I see a lot of people simping for Peter, and I don't see a lot of people talking about this point. So I had to just get it out there, man. I think this dude is a freaking weirdo. Now let's talk about Clara. When Clara is actually declared to be one of the new mistresses in the Nocturnal ending, she says something really interesting. Like, she says she doesn't know if she's good or bad anymore. All she is trying to do is to be hard on herself and be gentle to others. And I think this also represents Mother Bordeaux's sentiments pretty well. And again, it just works for me, you know? Now, Mother Bordeaux, she also probably doesn't know anymore if she's good or bad, right? Because she tried to help, but somehow they've ended up in a situation where her people now have to be sacrificed for the rituals instead of bulls. More on that later. So it must be confusing for Mother Bordeaux as well. She probably doesn't know she's been corrupted by Suok. Again, I just don't know. I cannot help but feel like Clara is supposed to be the representation of Mother Bordeaux and Suok and her evil twin and everything, but I need more evidence for this. So I need Pathologic 4 to come out as quick as possible, man. Maybe even Pathologic 3 will provide more insight, but for now, let's get to the conclusion. Grace and Taya, as you know, become the new mistresses. Taya becomes the mistress of bulls, Grace becomes the mistress of the dead, and both of them say something that actually emphasizes my point. Let's start with Taya. As the new mistress of bulls, she says she's going to be taking care of all the bulls, including all the aurochs that are now wandering around, and just as an interesting idea, I think the reason the aurochs are here in the first place is because they're mourning the death of whom they think is the real boss Turok. So anyways, she says she's going to be taking care of the aurochs, but they're eventually going to leave, so her main task is to take care of her own bulls. And Artemi asks, what about the kin? And Taya responds in the most interesting way. This kind of blew my mind. She says the kin are the new bulls. She says that they are now closer to bulls than they are to human. And that entails something incredibly dark that I'm going to get into just now after what Grace says. And Grace basically criticizes that the old mistress's morality was too simple, too black and white in her own words, and hints at her own complex morality by using the winds of the town as a metaphor. So the winds used to be red, white, and blue, or something like that. I can't remember the exact colors, and she says that the colors have now changed. They've changed into this fancy colors that she mentions that I'm not going to bother even trying. And this tells me two things. She's willing to explore the morally gray areas. She doesn't like the idea of being black and white when it comes to moral and ethics. She is clearly not afraid to challenge the traditional morals and ethics. And the second point that this tells me is that the town and its magic have undergone a change. This means whatever you need to maintain the town and its magic also needs to change. And obviously, the kin are in charge of the town's magic, right? Which means whatever they needed to maintain this magic needs to change. And the change occurs in them becoming the new bulls, aka becoming the new new sacrifice in their ritual, which is a morally gray area. And this is the direction Suok's dominion is heading toward. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So here's my conclusion. Although she is the fake version of Suok, I think eventually she can become as powerful, if not more powerful, through the magic of the kin. Because the reason they have to now sacrifice themselves is so that she can grow her darkness and eventually engulf the whole world once more, just like the real Suok did. Except this time, she doesn't have anything or anyone to stop her, because the real boss Turok is already preoccupied with the real darkness inside of him. So in a way, you could say the fake version of Suok is actually more terrifying, because the kin are just going to keep sacrificing and sacrificing and sacrificing until she is, you know, like super powerful. And for me, the fact that she goes into slumber tells me she feels safe enough to do so. Why does she feel safe? It feels like a naive take, but honestly, I don't think everything in this game is supposed to be hidden layers under hidden layers. The fact that she feels safe enough to sleep for years to come tells me it's because she does not need to be active. She has successfully corrupted the whole town, including Mother Bodo, into doing her bidding. Her darkness will grow, and once awake, who knows what sorts of devilry she's going to commit. She's basically going to become the dictator of the whole universe. And with this ending, there is quite literally nothing that can stop her, and Artemi has doomed the whole world into eternal corruption, which is why I have to take back everything I said about the Diurnal ending, because my take on the Diurnal ending was that it's an illusion. It's an illusion Artemi has put himself under to cope, but I'm so convinced it's not. Like, they're both bad endings. So yes, I was completely wrong about the Diurnal ending. Nocturnal ending, definitely without a doubt the worst ending out of the two.